Hi everyone, it's Henry here. Now recently I've been getting back into Necromunda with my gaming group after a break of about 20 years or whatever it is. It's amazing, it's a wonderful game, and I've been running an Escher gang. So when Games Workshop a couple of weeks ago sent us through a box of the new cutters to play around with, I was very, very happy. If you want to have a look at how I've been painting up my gang and sort of this speed painting journey I've been going on, I've been documenting that over on our Patreon. But for this, I'm going to show you how I've built, converted, and then painted up the cutters for them. So the plan is cool looking, super quick to do, so I can get it on the table and get gaming as soon as possible. So let's paint. You get 2 of the same sprue in the box, and each of the sprues has got 2 cutters on there. They build like a dream. I really am impressed with some of the plastic kits I've been getting from Specialist Games recently. Like just the thought that's gone into the assemblies has been fantastic. You've got a bunch of options for hair and faces, I think 4 options, and then you've got 1 set of each of the 4 different types of weapons that you can take. I'm also going to be using for these conversions the Death Maidens / Wild Runners kit, and I've also got the newish plastic Escher upgrade kit, just so I've got some little extra doodads at hand if I needed them. And I've also got the resin set from Games Workshop, the Champions kit. And this is because you can build either Champions or you can build Prospects to go on cutters. So I'm just going to play around, build one of each, see what I can make that looks cool. So once I've built up the bike as is, as it were, and one of the riders as is, it helps give me a better idea of what I can do to play around with it, how I can cut it up and do that sort of thing. So sub-assemblies, it's going to be really easy. The rider is a complete piece, and the bike is a separate piece as well. The only area you're going to run into a little bit of issues potentially is that the hands themselves are attached to the, I don't know what you call them, the handlebars, the thrusters, I don't know, whatever they are, the levers that make it go. They do have a little locator lug in there, so you can be confident that you're always going to glue them in roughly the same position, but there's a tiny bit of wiggle in that, and when you've got the join point of the wrist to the arm is so tiny, it can be a bit challenging. So for me, I'm going to nip off the hand and glue it on, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. The most frustrating part of the entire kit, in my opinion, assembly-wise, is once you've got the rider sort of in there, which might look quite forceful here, but it just sort of clicks in. You don't need to glue it in at all, which is cool, particularly if it goes down in game, you can just pop it off and use your model on foot. So yeah, you can see there where that lines up. But the most frustrating thing is this fin at the back. It sits not only on the body of the bike, but then it goes up onto her backside, so she's sort of underneath it. So you cannot glue that in place, or I couldn't anyway, glue that in place and then slot the rider in. So we're going to need to paint that separately and pop it in later on once most of the stuff's painted. Bit of a shame, but as long as we know it's coming, it's not a huge issue. Yeah, pinging her out might not be that easy in game, to be fair, because I imagine just broken the base doing that and all the rest of it. The weapons, yeah, lovely. You can build all 4 of the weapons, paint them separately, and then if you're any good with magnets, or to be honest with you, they're a fairly snug fit anyway, you can just push them in and swap your weapons loadout if you want to. For me, I'm learning that that's useful with the type of game that Necromunda is, but to be honest, I'd rather just paint more cutters and give myself loads of options. But the nice part is that for sub-assemblies and for painting, it's really handy having them sort of off the bike. But you can see here that all the weapons they're a complete set, so they don't share magazines or anything like that. So it's very easy to, if you're one of those magnet fiends, you can have some fun playing around with that. But on the whole, very nice. And what I like particularly is that you can build the bike in its entirety without the rider on it, so it can just look cool and sit there right at rest. Now, with me saying you can build it as a champion or as a prospect, they're 2 very different ends of the spectrum, right, when it comes to the gangers. And because the bodies aren't dissimilar that you get on the kit, I wanted to make sure I could differentiate it wherever possible. So I've used a Death Maiden arm here with a needle pistol. I've used the head from the Champions upgrade kit, and I was thinking I was going to use some of these nice little stiletto knife, toxin grenade type belt rigs to pop on her if she needed it. Tools for this, very simple: sharp poppy blade, extra thin Tamiya plastic cement, and some clippers. It's a really, really easy build. You're not going to struggle with any of this, I don't think, at all. For the gluing, the reason I'm using the Tamiya extra thin cement is because the Escher models, quite a lot of the Necromunda models actually, but the Escher models in particular are tiny. And if you're not careful and you get your plastic glue where you don't want it, you're at real risk of losing details as you squidge them together. So by using the extra thin cement, that flows in there. You need a tiny dot of it and you can put things together easy. What I was about to say about the riders, although they're similar, one of the sets of legs does have sort of significantly more spiky tights on it. So that combined with that shoulder pad from the Death Maiden and that big hair from the Champion model, I'm not going to need to use the little belt rig, which is really nice. I talk about my Escher gang a lot more in that Patreon article, but what I've done is, because all the hair colour is the same throughout, just for speed really, I've given the sort of the lower gangers simpler haircuts basically, and then the higher up they get, the more elaborate the hair gets, and it means it gives me the option, if I want to do something like a Death Maiden, I can actually do a different coloured hair and it would really, really stand out. Now the resin heads, as the plastic heads actually, to be fair, from the normal kit, don't quite fit perfectly on the riders because of the angle, obviously, to have them looking forwards. So all I've done here is just tiny little trim just to flatten the collar off a little bit, just to make it sit a little bit more flush. So you can see there all those lovely spikes. Now we can just get a slightly better, more natural looking fit. Now, there's still a tiny gap there, and this is one of my favourite products for using for this really small sort of gap filling. We're going to use it later as well on the Prospect model. It's called Plastic Putty by Vallejo, and it's basically marble dust in a paste. So it dries fairly quickly, and then you can sand it if you want to smooth it off. Now this is how I'm going to approach doing the handlebars. Obviously I am having the model with one arm off the handlebars, but the hands, as it's shown in the instructions, are attached to the handlebars. So I need to figure out how to replace the handlebar without the hand, but I also need to make sure that the hand that she does have on is secure and will always line up, because if I want to paint her separately, that needs to happen. So I've put the glue in the non-moving part of the model there. I'm not the world's best hobbyist, I'm sure, but this is how I go about things that generally avoid getting horrible mistakes everywhere. So I put the glue in the part of the model I'm not really moving. I've located the shoulder into there, and I'm lining up the front there with the little lug that's inside the hole. So now I know that sat on there, we're looking good. All I'm going to do is just use a very sharp knife to then remove the hand off the rider there. But for now I want to leave her in place just to check everything's looking right. For the other handlebar, so the one that our hand is going to be off, chop off the hand, and then I had a look through the Wild Runners kit to see what I could use to replace the handlebar. And there's a lot of these throwing knives in there which have a nice little sort of knurled or very pronounced grip on there. And actually on one of the sets that has the whip, it's got a nice little knobbly bit on the end, which I thought just a bit of decoration and helps it look like I think it was deliberate, right? So here's the rider, everything's lining up. And once we're ready, we can just remove that cut as well. And I find for this, a super sharp blade, get the model as flat as you can on the table, and we want to go through it. We don't want to force the plastic apart, as it were. You really want to just slide through it. If we force it through, you're going to flare the plastic out a lot, and it won't go back together too cleanly. That was a pretty nice cut. It's a tiny little joint and a sharp blade, so it's absolutely fine. A little bit trickier. I wanted to do something a bit more intricate with the Wild Runner. I wanted to give her the boat. I love it when you see like the Kislev horse archers and things like that firing from horseback and stuff. So I need to take the torso off. Now I've used the test rider, as it were, I did earlier when I built the whole model up. And the reason you have to go about it, or I think you have to go about it like this, is that the crotch of the torso and the crotch are attached to each other. So when you locate them into the legs, then it creates the whole piece. So if you want the crotch and everything in there, you need to glue it all together first. So all I've done is glue it together. Now I'm using a fine modelling saw. It's a Tamiya one, jeweler's saw, I'm sure you've seen them. It just creates a really, really clean cut between the two. It's, in my opinion, if I tried to use a knife to go through this, I'd end up at risk of pushing the plastic apart and flaring it out, like I said before. For the torso, I gave myself about 1 millimetre of extra room, which I could then trim away with the knife, just to make sure I got it exactly how I wanted. And they fit together pretty good already. Say this is very much a gaming set of miniatures for me. So whilst I'm probably executing everything at about 80% of how I would normally do it if I was painting it for a display or I was trying to get armies on parade or something like that. But one of the things that I would do regardless of that is use plastic glue, kind of like a putty, right? So it melts the plastic. So we can use the fact that it does that to create a nice smooth join between the parts. So popped on the plastic glue and I pressed her in. Now we do have a little bit of a gap here where her torso joins the waist. So I'm going to go back to our plastic putty and start filling it in there. I'm trying to be neat, but inevitably you're going to get a little bit where you don't want it to go. And I found a very simple way to just clean that off and smooth it off. So all I'll do is I'll get the putty all around where I want it. And you've got a fairly long time for drying, like work time with this before it dries. And then all I do is get a slightly wet cotton bud and then just move it over and it will clean it off the surfaces you don't want it, and it's going to leave it in the recess. And then I just repeated this step a couple of times once it was dry to fill that gap right out. Now I'm sure it's better to use, green stuff and milliput and all that sort of thing. If you wanted a super clean, super smooth looking thing, I'm sure it is. This is quick, and that's what this whole project's been about for me. So you can see, here's our champion ready to go. See, I've used that putty round her neck and smoothed that off. I also used it to join her ponytail on. Now I didn't have much left on the sprue, but there were these two little parts here, which look suspiciously like the handlebars without any hands on them. You can see here how your handlebar looks. Very, very similar to those parts. So that handlebar that took me a good few minutes to convert and sort out to not have a hand on it. So I thought, that's odd. So I went back into the instructions. There's no parts list, that's okay. But I go through, look at all the parts where the arms are, where they go in, and nothing there about the empty handlebar. So thanks for that. The bike itself, super, super simple. I've just sprayed it with my choice of metal. I used Exhaust Manifold by Watercolour series here, and then I dry brushed it with lead belcher. For the Champion's bike, I wanted to add a little bit of leopard print just to tart it up a little bit, make it look a little bit more special. But I want these really grungy and dirty and grimy looking. So I wanted it to look like it had been painted and then it had all worn away in the ash waste, riding it around, all the erosion and abrasion had caused the paint to disappear. And I'm going to do it yellow. So I've done a little base coat of brown there through my airbrush. I've used Tamiya Flat Earth, and I'm using Tamiya Flat White here to then highlight that area of brown. Now, the reason I've done this is I can get very, very thin paint with Tamiya and still maintain a decent level of control. So I'm literally painting this as if I was trying to paint the paint panel in real life, kind of thing. We don't need to mask it off or anything like that. If we've got a little bit of a soft blend out towards the metal, lovely. That's what we want. I'm not looking for sharp edges here. Then I'm going to grab a Bad Moon Yellow. It's a contrast paint by Games Workshop. It's a lovely dirty yellow. Really enjoy using it. And I've thinned it 50-50 with airbrush thinner. I've used Tamiya thinner with the Tamiyas, about 4 drops of thinner to paint. And then I've used normal airbrush thinner with the Bad Moon Yellow, 50-50. Spraying 25 psi. I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in our Harder and Steenbeck Cult of Paint Evolution. Now I've got a few of these little templates, or stencils rather, from Anarchy Models, store over here in the UK. And I've got a few of these sort of leopard print style ones. And yes, it would be neater to tape everything off and this and that, but that would take ages. And this whole project is meant to be where I can add in gangers and add in units in an evening's hobby session. So I line it up best I can, get it to sit nice and flat. And then I'm using black paint here. This is Rubber Black by Tamiya, but you use whatever black you like. and we spray it through, and we get a nice little leopard sort of print design on there. Now, I went a bit heavy on this side because I want to show you how I will fix it on that side. And what I mean by going too heavy is that as the yellow is fading out into the silver, the problem there was you had really faded out yellow, almost pure silver, with a solid black leopard print design on there. It doesn't make any sense, right? The black needs to follow the yellow with that. So on this side, you'll notice we spray a lot less on, and we keep it much, much tighter towards the middle of the panel. You see how it's already started to fade out there as we move out. There's still some tidying up to do, but nowhere near as much as we've got to do on that side. But it's super easy. All I'm going to do is go back and get my silver, a little piece of sponge. So this is the exhaust manifold, so the darker silver that I chose to base coat my bike in. Start sponging that all around the outside, a little bit in the middle for some chips, but mainly around the outside, and effectively just erase and fade out some of that paint that may have gone where we didn't want it to. So you can see that one that was furthest up near the handlebar, it's disappeared, it's gone. And hopefully what we're getting, what it looks like we've got now, is what I was aiming for, which is that really old paintwork that's been scratched about, but there's still a bit showing through. I love using enamel washes. This is Track Wash by MIG. I've thinned it with a tiny bit of mineral spirits, so I have some mineral spirits in a little dish next to it, so I dip my brush in there, dip my brush in the pot of the enamels, and then I just wash that all over the model. I haven't varnished the model or anything like that. As long as your acrylic paint is dry, you're not going to have any issues here. So really is a case of sort of a nice heavy wash, get it on there, and then if I need to clean it up as I go, I dip my brush in the mineral spirits and just tidy it up a little. And if I've got any large areas of pooling, I just try and pull them down towards the sort of deeper recesses where most of the dirt is going to congregate. So I just want to take a second to say thanks ever so much for those of you that support us over on Patreon. As I say, you can check out the Escher article and or video and a bunch of other speed painting ones I've been doing. And Andy's got a great army project on there at the minute as well with his Eldar. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do these videos every week on YouTube and Patreon and bring in these other artists. So very, very grateful. Once that was dry, about 15 minutes or so, I'm just grabbing another enamel wash. This is Streaking Grime by AK, so a sort of dark grey, brown, green colour. Just a few little dots of that here and there, just to add a little bit more interest to the metal. Now we've got a nice big, instrument dial on there. And I love that classic sort of green screen with the little red target dot on there. So even though this is super quick, I want to put it on there. So I've used Incubi Darkness by Games Workshop over the black, and I'm using a fairly thinned paint, so we've got a bit of that black showing through. Then I mix in a little bit of a bright green. In this case I used Moot Green by Games Workshop. I'm just going to start drawing vertical lines, so creating the grid. Always going in the same direction, and what that does is it deposits a little bit more paint at the bottom of that grid where I take my brush away. And over time that's just going to make the bottom of it look a little bit brighter than the top. It's, it's by no means high-end painting, don't get me wrong, but it will make a little bit of a difference, suggest a little bit of lighting that we've got like this glass screen on there. And then we'll do the horizontal ones as well. And there's no real trick to this, you just, get a nice sharp point on your brush and, just get comfortable and move it down. And this has taken, this is a slightly sped up footage, but this has taken all of 2 minutes, if that, to do the screen. So absolutely plenty of return, bang for your buck time wise. And then I nearly forgot the little red dot. This was Mephiston red, but whatever. Little dot of red there for the Goliaths that are continually beating the snot out of me in the campaign. A few little touches, just to, I guess, gimmicky things really, but just to make it a little bit more exciting. I want to do a bit of sort of scorching on the thrusters the thrusters, the back bit, isn't it? Turbines at the front, thrusters at the back, I think. So this is just Agrax to shade in my airbrush. I haven't thinned this at all, and I'm going to apply tons and tons of layers of this towards the back. We end up making it look nice and scorched. Really do try and take your time with this. Make sure it's dry before you apply the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth layer of it. So just use the air out your airbrush to help dry that. If you whack it on too much in one go, you're going to get sort of little streaks and little tide marks and all sorts. It won't work right. And then I'm grabbing a Flat Black by Tamiya. thin to the point where it's the same consistency as the Agrax. Then we're just going to spray this on slightly further back. Now, last little thing I wanted to do, this is an enamel wash called engine oil, or fresh engine oil. And unlike most enamel washes that dry with a very matte finish, this has deliberately got a nice glossy finish. And I thought, especially with speed painting and stuff, I think changes of finish are a really great way to get a bit more interest in your models. So I'm just sort of tapping this over the bits of the engine at the front, just to add that little extra dimension, make it look a little bit cooler. So all in all, this bike's probably taken an hour to paint, which is great, and the rider's taken about an hour to paint as well. I say that's the whole goal with this project of mine I'm doing with the Escher, is to learn the game, but have something painted that I like. I don't love it, that's absolutely fine, I don't have to. I've now played 6 games of Necromunda, I think is incredible. I'm 100% back in, and for the next project, I think Goliath, maybe Ash Waste Nomads, I will spend some more time on that and create a gang that I'm really proud of to display. So as we look at them going around on the little turntable here with one of the normal gangers, it's worth saying, these models aren't painted with the intentions of blowing up on a screen and looking at them and judging them in that sphere necessarily. They've been painted very much with the idea of looking cool on the table, being able to get them on the table nice and quick, and just enjoying gaming, socialising, and hopefully for you, what I have found is giving me masses of motivation to get back and paint, which is what I was really, really needing. So really, really fun project. I hope you've enjoyed some of the bits that I put in this video. If you've got any questions at all, pop them down in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not, and I'll see you next time.